Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The person who probably knows the most about Rudy Giuliani is Wayne Barrett. He's written 2 enormously detailed books about our former mayor and always suggested that we watch for the unexpected. And now look what's happening. Rudy's running for president, and he's right now the favorite to be the Republican nominee. So welcome, Wayne.
Hi, Ronnie.
So what do you think when you watch this? I mean, how did you watch that debate the other night?
Well, first of all, I thought a presidential candidacy was something that he's been planning all his life. I mean, in the first book that I wrote, I quoted from Kathy Livermore, who was his girlfriend in college, and he wrote a speech which he was going to deliver at the DNC, not the RNC, right? It was his nominating speech, and he would deliver it to her in a mirror, and so he's been thinking presidential for a long time, and it's not something that's unexpected, especially after September 11th. In fact, I would say from September 11th on, I believed he would run for president. If Gore had won in 2000 and Gore was the president on 9/11, Rudy Giuliani would have run against him in 2004, and the campaign would all have been about why didn't he catch Osama bin Laden, assuming that Gore made the same sorts of mistakes that George W. Bush is going after the wrong guys and all the rest of it. Everything that he doesn't say about W, he would have said about an Al Gore presidency, and he would have been running himself. So I think he's fully expected him to run for president. I fully expected him to be a strong candidate for president. Everybody thinks it's the orthodoxy out of the punditry of Washington that he can't make it as a Republican nominee because he's not in the mainstream of the party on these social issues. Well, 9/11 transcends all of that. If John McCain doesn't take him on 9/11, if he thinks that the lingering memories of 5 years in a prison in North Vietnam is going to outstrip the events of 9/11, Rudy's the man who stood up for America. Rudy's the man when we were attacked that was our front line of defense. Rudy's the man who understands the terrorism threat. That's going to prevail. All of these other issues fall by the wayside. I mean, it's not that they're unimportant. It's not that they're trivial. It's just that they cannot trump this transcendent event. And Rudy can ride 9/11 certainly to the Republican nomination. I think that that's probable at the moment.
I think that it helps him, actually. I think it's those people who are disenchanted with the Republicans and Bush who might vote for a Democrat will be attracted by the social policies that he adopts. I mean, I think it's very smart politics that he's stuck with his viewpoint, because he couldn't get away with changing it, I don't think.
He's already moderated in many ways.
He'll moderate more and more, I'm
many
sure.
ways. But the fact is that does make him, I think you're correct, a more presentable Republican candidate in November. The question is how much will these issues affect him in the primaries?
The basic question is, do you think he should be president?
I think it would be a terrible thing. I think it would be a terrible thing.
So we start from that point, right?
Yes.
And the book that I've just finished reading, Grand Illusion, takes on that whole question of 9/11.
Yes.
And shows what a grand illusion it is. Should we talk about that a little bit?
We should. I mean, the thing that's happened really is we live in such a world of spin. Look, he did say the right things that day. He said some poignant things.
On television,
yes. I mean, even on that day, for a mayor to come out the day we're attacked and friends of his, dear friends of his, died, and he's saying things like, we're not going to scapegoat the Muslim community. It's not a community that did this. It's individuals that did this. He was a reassuring voice. No one can take that away from him. I certainly wouldn't want to try. I wrote the most positive piece at the Village Voice that I've written about Rudy Giuliani in many, many years that first week. A week later, I wanted to eat the words, because you remember you were in the city council at the time, and within 2 weeks of 9/11, Rudy Giuliani already seized the moment and understood that he could use 9/11 to propel a future career. And within 2 weeks, he was trying to get the city council or the state legislature to change, extend the term limit, to eliminate a term limits law that he himself had supported, so that he could get a third term as mayor. Within 2 weeks of 9/11.
And then when that wouldn't work, then he tried to extend his tenure for a couple of months,
3 months,
saying that it was so important, the transition.
Yes, that he was the indispensable man. It had never before happened in American democracy that someone's term had been extended beyond beyond his term, but he described himself as the indispensable man. I actually quote one of the highest level officials of the Bloomberg administration, because obviously we know those 3 months were never granted him, even though Mike Bloomberg and Mark Green willingly went along with that proposition. He didn't get the 3 months. And in the course of the first 3 months of the Bloomberg administration, Mike Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani talked twice. They talked twice. That's how indispensable he was.
Now, in effect, though, what happened on 9/11, the city administration was in disarray.
Yes, and I mean, the disasters that we lay out in the book, just run the complete gambit. I mean, let's start with the most obvious. And the most obvious is amazing to me that the National Press Corps pays so little attention to it. Chris Wallace was the first national reporter on Fox in the recent interview with Giuliani to ask him anything about the command center. Why did you put the command center in 7 World Trade? Now he's trying to blame.
And then he lied.
Yes.
He does lie, right?
You know what he said? Ronnie, this is what he said on national television. Yeah. He said on national television, and not a single newspaper has followed it up. He said on national television, well, we had a backup command center.
He had several, didn't he say?
We had a backup command center, and within a half hour, everything was sound. We moved to the backup command center, when in fact he's written in his own book, he's testified that they had no backup command center. There was no existing backup command center. They kicked in a firehouse door a few blocks away to try to create a command center in a firehouse. They got in there, they had to kick in the door. Then they went to the Tribeca Hotel. They look up and they see the whole ceiling is glass. They're literally roaming the streets looking for a place to settle. Right. This is his own account, which he's given many, many times. Sometimes he's paid $100,000, $200,000 to deliver this as a speech, right? And now he's saying on national television, we had everything. We were prepared in every way. We had a backup command center, and nobody even challenges it.
Well, they don't even really challenge that it was on the 23rd floor of 7 World Trade Center, do they?
No, they never.
And the one time he was asked, he blamed Howard.
Right. Well, the thing is, why does it wind up there? It's a question that we analyze in a way that's never been analyzed before, and it's really very disturbing. But why is it so important, first of all? Rudy is the hero of 9/11 because he was there. That's the only reason he's the hero. Well, why was he there? He was there because the bunker was there. I'm not saying that. He wrote it in his own book, Leadership. He said that he and Denny Young are at the Midtown restaurant. They get in the car, and we headed towards the command center, is what he wrote himself. Bernie Kerik is waiting for him in front of the command center. He gets to the command center, and Bernie says, oh, we've already vacated it. We have to find someplace else to be. Well, now what's the consequence of that? Well, we interviewed every single author of the Chapter 9 of the 9/11 Commission report that deals with the city's response. John Farmer was the senior attorney and the principal author of that chapter. He gives us quotes in here that they could never get into the 9/11 Commission report, which says very clearly that it cost lives that day that there was no functioning command center. There was a functioning command center would have had telecommunications, police to fire. There wouldn't have been the inability to communicate between the two departments. You would have had video that you might have anticipated the collapse of the towers. You would have had all kinds of equipment. You would have had teams of people working together in a command center. It would have made all the difference in the world. So the fact that there was not a command center was a deadly, deadly event that day.
Terrible.
And so...
And they never did recreate it, did they? Because when they had all the police officials and the administration officials, they didn't have the fire officials until Von Essen came, but he wasn't connected.
That's right. Now, my only point, though, is that the absence of the command center is a deadly event that day. So why was the command center put in the 7 World Trade? We're the ones who got the memo, and we didn't get it from Jerry Howard. Jerry Howard, it was in Giuliani's own archive. We found this memo that Jerry Howard wrote him. It's a 5-page memo that Chris Wallace was waving in his hand on the interview with. We revealed that memo, and that memo said, it was a memo from Jerry Howard to the deputy mayor saying, we've got to put the command center in Brooklyn. Let's put it in Metrotech. Laid out all the reasons for it. Said we can't put it in downtown Manhattan. That's exactly what the memo said. Now, the mayor resisted that. The mayor says to Jerry Howard, Denny Young, his attorney, keeps saying, we want it within walking distance of City Hall. No one in the police hierarchy, we interviewed Lou Anemone, who was the highest ranking uniformed police officer in the department. They call him the chief of the department. We interviewed a number of people in the administration, including one who was present at a cabinet meeting in which Howard Safer, who was then the police commissioner, a Giuliani loyalist to this day, who's never challenged what we wrote. We wrote that he called it ground zero. Now, this is in 1997. He's calling it ground zero because it was already bombed in 1993. He says, you can't put it there, Mr. Mayor. Lou Anemone produces this vulnerability study of the most vulnerable sites in the city. It's at the top of the list. And they still insist on putting it there. Now, once you say you're going to have to be within walking distance of City Hall, then you have to go up. You can't go down. You can't have a bunker where it is now in Brooklyn, like Bloomberg and Kelly have put it underground in Brooklyn, almost precisely where Jerry Hauer recommended all those years ago. But if you put it in lower Manhattan, it's all below the floodplain. So you can't go down. You have to go up. It left limited choices. And then this highly political commissioner of the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, Bill Diamond, he and a brokerage, a highly political brokerage firm, come up with Seven World Trade. And Larry Silverstein, the owner of Seven World Trade, becomes this giant, giant giver to Rudy, through fundraisers for him on both of his boats. And what I mean, not on both of his boats. He has one boat, but he threw two fundraisers.
But more than that, now the Giuliani and Partners, they're hired, aren't they, as consultants on site selection for CB Ellis?
Yes, they are.
Same company.
Same company that picked the site.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about, and we have so little time, so let's go. So not only was the command center not usable, but it was in a terrible place, but we forget that there was 1993 bombing at World Trade Center. So what happened, and Giuliani then became mayor right after that. What steps did he take from 1993 to 2001 to improve New York's defense against terrorism?
One of the things that we reveal in the book that, frankly, when I went out on the reporting trail, I never would have believed was true, is that Rudy Giuliani never mentioned the 93 bombing to anyone in his administration. It was as if it didn't happen. And you may remember that in addition to the bombing, which occurred in February of 93 when Rudy's running for mayor, in June of 93, the NYPD and the FBI raided this bombing factory in Queens where the same fundamentalists were planning to blow up the bridges and the tunnels and the UN. And Ray Kelly was the police commissioner at the time, said they were a week away from blowing them all up. It was a giant bomb factory, same Muslim fundamentalists. So you would think when you came in with both of those incidents that it would be at the top of your mind. Well, just to give an example, we interviewed every member of the transition committee that Rudy appointed, his own transition committee, to interview police commissioner candidates. Not one of those people had ever discussed. They said we were completely uninterested in the 93 bombing or in terrorism. That wasn't a question that we put to candidates. And then we interviewed all the candidates. All of them said it never came up in any of the interview processes. They're picking a police commissioner on the heels of these two incidents. Terrorism never comes up. The 93 bombing never comes up. Adam Walensky was the chairman of the transition committee. He said, no, we never had any interest in it or discussion about it. We were talking about street crime.
But meanwhile, he makes City Hall a fortress.
Yeah.
He has, what do you call the cops with the rifles on top of buildings when the people with HIV/AIDS come? I mean, it was so disproportionately all over the place, right?
Well, what he said now in the post 93, the post 9/11 environment, he cited the fortification of City Hall as his example of what he did because he understood that there was a terrorist. Right. Well, the terrorists aren't going to blow up a three-story building. No, they're looking for a little. The fact is that he fortified it against protesters and people. But he's citing that as an example of how he understood the threat. It's another example of how he misunderstood.
And then, of course, with his model for the Office of Emergency, what is it called? Office of Emergency Management.
Yeah. OEM.
It never truly worked, did it? It certainly didn't work on 9/11, that the different agencies were integrated and were exchanging information.
Well, we lay out that in the book, is that the protocols for a unified command, which is what OEM was supposed to put in place, as valiantly as Jerry Hauer, the commissioner, strived in the early years to get them off the ground, Rudy never supported them. Howard Safer, the police commissioner, refused to sign off on any of these protocols because the police want to run everything. They would never agree to any of the protocols that Jerry Howard would introduce. So really on 9/11, there were not acceptable protocols. They were not really in place. Now, Richie Shire had by then long succeeded Jerry Howard. This guy is just like Bernie Carrick and Tom Von Essen. Richie Shire is a guy who was a dispatcher. He was a dispatcher most of his life. He winds up running the office.
He was the head of the Dispatchers Union.
Well, he wasn't the head of it. He was an influential voice
member.
within,
Von Essen.
and he was like the bridge between Rudy's campaign and the Dispatchers Union, which the Von Essen's union and Richie Shire's union were the only two unions to endorse him, municipal unions to endorse him in '93. And Shire winds up a darling of the administration, and so does Von Essen. Obviously.
Both of them now members of
Giuliani
Partners.
Yes, and so the point is simply that Rudy was totally uninterested. I mean, the amazing thing is that he was the former United States attorney. Every single terrorism case in the country, whether you're talking about the bombings of the African missions, is all prosecuted out of the very office that he used to run. The assistant U.S. attorneys, we interviewed all of them. They were all hired by Rudy. None of them ever had a conversation with him. Mary Jo White, the United States attorney, said Rudy never wanted to talk to us about the terrorism threat. We never had a single conversation with him about the terrorism threat. No one in the administration, not like somebody else had the conversations with him. Look, they're members of the NYPD that are part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Those were the only people. And Rudy never increased the number. There were the same number of the NYPD detectives assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force under David Dinkins, and there was the same number there on 9/11. Despite the 93 bombings, Rudy never increased the allotment, even though he got thousands of new police officers. He did not put any of them into counterterrorism. They had the same number of police officers in there. They were totally indifferent to it. They didn't interact with this office, which is just 100 yards away, 100 yards away, and find out, well, what's the threat? What is Al-Qaeda? Rudy said after 9/11, he had to go buy the Bodansky book, who's the first author who really wrote a book about Osama bin Laden, to find out who the guy was after 9/11.
And then he said, thank God we have George Bush's after. Another thing in the book that startled me was the juxtaposition of the use, well, it wasn't the consistency of the use of the pesticide when we had the mosquitoes, was that the Asian flu?
West Nile.
West Nile. And then the total lack of concern for the health of the workers and the people who lived down at the World Trade Center site. Explain that. There was no plan, was there?
Oh, it was just, we lay out in a couple of chapters at the end of the book the complete mismanagement of Ground Zero. The New York Times just this week has now done an editorial finally saying Rudy Giuliani was responsible for the disaster at Ground Zero, the toxic disaster. Again, it was one of those things that we became the captives of spin about, because the only question that anybody examined at the time, and Rudy got all kinds of praise at the time because Ground Zero was under budget, the cleanup was under budget, and was ahead of schedule. Well, what schedule? No, nothing's been built down there yet. What kind of a schedule was necessary? Why were we in such a rush that we were allowing the cleanup to go on while the fire still burned? It burned till December. It's burned till mid-December.
All the time it's burning.
And all the time it's burning. It's spewing all these toxins, and everybody's walking around the site, including Rudy, without a respirator on. Rudy was the worst example in the world. He would bring the top
stars.
Leaders of the world down there on the grand tour. It was like, this is my backyard.
Right.
He was saying, this is my backyard. This is my private property. You can't get on the site except through me. And now he's saying, but I didn't have anything to do with the fact that everybody down there now has these respiratory conditions. Thousands of people, construction workers, firefighters, police officers, transit workers. Many transit workers were down there. They all now are living with these toxins. Some of them aren't living. Some of them aren't living. And finally now, the New York Times this week, in its lead editorial, laid that at the feet of Rudy Giuliani. I mean, look, you can't excuse the EPA. and Christy Todd Whitman, they were putting out reports saying that the air was okay, but they insisted on respirators.
Yeah.
It was Rudy's responsibility.
Right. And his health commission.
Yes, to make sure that people were out there with respirators on, and they had their own contractor who said to them, look, you got like 22, 24 exit and entrance points here. If you cut it down to 2, we can regulate who gets on, and we can make sure they've all got respirators. Wouldn't do it. And one reason after another that the city was indifferent to the circumstances, to the health and safety circumstances of the people at Ground Zero, even though they were in charge of it. And it's having calamitous effect. It is amazing to me that you can go run for president with lawsuits going on, ongoing lawsuits against the city of New York from thousands of these people,
and not have any,
and none of it blow back on you.
It was a rush, wasn't it, to get, because he's always interested in image.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? The image of New York fast on its feet, the stock market opening right away, everything's safe. I remember Catherine Freed was also in the city council. Then they made her into an hysterical woman.
Yes.
Because she complained about the air quality and wanted to bring her own people in to, an outside consultant to come in and testify, and it wouldn't have anything to do with it. But what I've always wondered about him is he honestly as sentimental? What is it about him? I mean, he was also partly responsible because he allowed that first phase of a recovery, what do you call it? Search and recovery?
Well, I think you had to do something
but
there.
He
so
kept
long
it
as
going
yes.
for a month.
Well, no, he never really moved the site. He never really transformed the site.
Right.
From a rescue operation legally. He never took a series of steps that would have required the implementation, for example, of OSHA guidelines, the Office of Safety. Right. He did not.
You mean they'd automatically kick in at a certain point?
If you transform the site and said we are now moving into a total cleanup phase, a recovery phase down there, then you would have had to say, well, we've got to meet certain occupational standards then. We've got to meet certain standards in terms of safety then. But he kept it perpetually in this kind of limbo of, we knew we weren't rescuing anybody after a couple of weeks. We certainly knew we weren't rescuing anybody.
Almost
and
after
yet,
a couple of days.
Yes, they kept it in this limbo. And that's one of the reasons why rules were suspended, why there weren't any real rules that were enforced down there, is because it was in this legal limbo.
And then, of course, one of the other major issues was the lack of communication between the fire and the police, and the use of the fire phones, the telephones, that the cell phones that the fire department used, that everybody knew didn't work for years, right?
Well, the radios, I think.
The radios,
yes.
I mean.
Yeah.
The total...
Well, there's one, if you looked at 911, if you looked at the radios, the 911 system, as we describe it in the book, it's just this unbelievable disaster.
They told people to stay put.
Everybody's being told to stay put, even when, by 9 o'clock in the morning, the fire chiefs on the scene had said vacate both buildings. But right up to the end, the only thing that 911 operators were telling people was stay put. Even though fire dispatch is not just 911, 911 is a police-run operation, fire dispatch is run by the fire department, and 911 kicks most calls in a fire situation to fire dispatch, and the fire dispatcher is part of the same department. The chiefs had said vacate the building, but they had no way of getting the information. If the chief says vacate the building, you would think that the fire dispatchers would know that they want the building vacated, but no, the fire dispatchers are telling people stay where you are.
There was that one radio, one form of radio, wasn't there?
Yes, now we'll get to the radios. Now the radios, in 1993, the radios completely failed. Right. We have extensive interviews with Chief Fusco, who was the fire chief who ran the response to the 93 bombing. Yeah. He did reports afterwards. He laid out about 10 things that failed in the 93 situation. He remained the chief of the department, the highest ranking uniformed officer in the fire department for the first few months of the Giuliani administration. He tried to tell them, we have all these problems that we learned in 93. The fire commissioner, then Howard Safert, didn't want to hear anything about it. The mayor didn't want to hear anything about it. He knew the mayor. Tried to bring it to the attention of the new mayor. Nobody was interested in it at all. He laid out and wrote up voluminous documents about all the things that went wrong in 93 in the response. one of the primary ones was the radios. We cannot have another situation like this where the firefighters are going in with the same radios. We found documents going back to 1990 where they were described in internal fire department documents as not only dysfunctional, but a threat to the lives of firefighters. We found documents that said that in 1990, and here on 9/11, those firefighters are still carrying exactly the same radio. Rudy took until March of 2001 to try to introduce a new radio. He finally introduces a new radio in March of 2001. It's completely dysfunctional. So they have to pull it back.
The firefighter who was calling Mayday and couldn't get a response.
I think you were at that hearing.
Yes, I was.
Yes,
I remember this.
Yes,
it was
you asked the
unbelievable.
questions. Right now, they had to withdraw that radio, which they put out in March of 2001. Now, in fact, that radio is a better radio. It's a modern radio. It's not a radio that's been used by fire departments, but it's a better radio than the old radio. They still had many months between then and September to reconfigure it and put it back out, but instead they did nothing. So on 9/11, the firefighters are still stuck with the same radios that in 1990 were called a threat to their lives in an official internal memorandum of the fire department. They're still carrying them. Now, those radios are completely malfunctioning all day long and costing firefighter lives that day. Rudy has argued that that they could not have been made what's called interoperable, which is absurd.
It's not true.
Interoperable means when the police department can talk to the fire department. Right. Many fire departments and police all over the country have. But the fact was that Rudy had an announcement. We talk about it in the book in 1995, where the Federal Communications Commission actually gave them the span in which a waiver just for the city of New York, where they could have created interoperable communications between police and fire.
They never got it together.
Rudy has a press conference announcing we won the waiver, and then they never got it.
We've come to the end of this half hour, and we haven't even begun. So, will you come back?
I sure will, Ronnie.
All right. I still don't understand. Do you have an ulcer? I don't understand how you could have so much information and know this person so well and be able to even smile or be calm about it. It is so outrageous. But we're going to continue discussing Rudy Giuliani, 9/11, and his Giuliani and partners, and his 8 years as mayor. Thank you very much, Wayne Barrett.
Thank you, Ronnie.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.